Okay, guys, we are back. Our next presenter, I'm so happy to introduce her. She is our Assistant Legislative Auditor and Director of Local Government Services, Miss Diane Allison. She has been a CPA for 24 years and has over 30 years of accounting experience, including the local government, not-for-profit, public accounting, and for-profit manufacturing sectors. Diane currently serves as Assistant Legislative Auditor and Director of Local Government Services of the LLA, which oversees the work of more than 200 independent CPA firms that conduct over 3,600 audits and other types of engagements, performs various advisory services, prepares fiscal and actuarial notes for the Louisiana legislature, and educates local governments on financial management. Diane chairs the Government Finance Officers Association Accounting. That was a lot. Auditing and Financial Reporting Committee, and is a member of numerous professional organizations. Please welcome Ms. Diane Allison.
Well, hello, everybody. You have to allow my video. I am so glad to be here with you this morning, and I thank you for all of your time. And I hope that the CLGE that we've prepared for you in these day and a half has been very, very interesting and learned a lot. To me, it was topics that I've never heard presented before, so I was able to learn a lot. But the big thing I want to talk to you about now and about this session, I want you to think of this session as we're just going to have a whole lot of fun. We're going to think a lot about ourselves. We're going to think a lot about what we try to do as finance officers in speaking to our board. And we just want to have a whole lot of fun with this topic. So let's go. What we're going to talk about really, so it's effectively communicating. That's part one. Financial information to our board. That's part two. So first we're going to talk about communication and a lot of elements of communication and styles and things like that. And professionalism enters into that. That could be a whole topic or half day in itself, but we're just going to touch on that for a little bit because it does enter into how we communicate. And then we're going to talk about that financial information to the governing body. If you're a passionate finance director like I was, there was so much really, really good stuff, and my board really needed to know this, and knowing these things will help them make financial decisions, but they are not the accounting nerds that I am. So there's this universe, and then there's this okay, hone in on the main things they need to know. One new board member asked me one time, Diane, what are the 3 numbers I need to focus on? And that really made me think a lot about that, and I want to share that with you. And once we determine that, how are we going to deliver that message effectively? Because that's really what we want to do. So to get to the basics of communication, what is it? We're just sharing information, right? We have to pass it on from one person to the next. But in between all of that stuff, there are elements of that. There's the sender, the receiver, and the message. The medium or channel is what way we choose to deliver that message. But I want to talk about noise the most. So noise is not like what you're hearing in the background. Noise is the difference between the sender has a message. So there's, quote, noise between the sender and the message, because I know what I want to say, but did I say it the way I meant to say it? And then there's noise between the message and the receiver. And why is that? Because the receiver is coming at this communication from their own perspective, through their own lens. And so maybe what I meant for them to understand, they didn't get, because there are barriers to communication as well. So have you ever had to say, no, that's not what I meant to say? And then there's what I said that I shouldn't have said, maybe a word I used wrong. So think about that noise. That's a big part to communication. And then the effectiveness are the channels that we use, these medium and these channels. And when I saw this chart, I'm going to just tell you, my little Diane feelings were hurt here. Because think about how we communicate financial information to the board. The number one thing we use is the last thing on the list. which is a doggone spreadsheet. Now, I know if you guys are like me, you love your spreadsheets, you take great pride, you learn from other people how to format it with your fonts and your shading, and you really work hard to bring out that color and whatever they need. But you can do all that, not near as rich in information as the face-to-face, the video conferencing, the telephone conversations. And what does that have to do? That has to do with emotion. There's a lot of emotion and passion in those methods and those communication channels that you just don't have in a spreadsheet. And for plenty of us, while we understand our spreadsheets, we created them, they're terrific. Not everybody can understand our spreadsheets. Sometimes they're just not getting them, especially non-accountants. And so think about this and think about your financial information to the board. So what you have to do is make it as information rich as possible for that. So we're going to talk about the 4 basic communication methods that we use. That's verbal, nonverbal, visual, and written, generally speaking. So verbally, this is a big one. In person, over the phone, virtually, chatting, texting, and we communicate both informally and formally. My grammar and my punctuation is much better when I'm writing a document than when I'm speaking, because when I'm speaking, I like to be informal. I like to be like genuine and real. And yes, I do use contractions with that, but not always called for. So you have to know that. So what are some good tips when we're communicating verbally? Be strong and confident in your speaking voice. Active listening. Active listening is a thread throughout this presentation. And we've talked a lot about these kinds of things during it, and it's basically being engaged in the conversation. At the end of the day, that's really what it is. You need to be in the moment. You need to listen. You need to look at the speaker. Think about what they're saying. Show interest. That's what active listening is. Avoiding filler words, that can be adjectives, it can be pause things like is a filler word, rambling, repeating yourself, lack of focus kind of thing. And industry jargon, and I'm guilty of this. I will use some highly technical accounting terms, and then that's noise. That can be noise to my receiver because they're not getting it. They don't know maybe what deferred inflows and deferred outflows are. Do you really have to use those words, or can you use some other words about that? Another way that we communicate, very, very strong, nonverbal. So here's how the studies show. There's verbal and there's nonverbal. So when you see somebody communicating and the nonverbal is telling you something that's different from the verbal, which means my actions and my words are not aligned, guess what rules? Guess what message gets through? The nonverbal. The nonverbal. That's why we know things like actions speak louder than rules. They say, do as I say, not as I do, but you're watching what they do because that's stronger. 70 to 93% of all communications is nonverbal. And I'm just going to say these words to you and you think about it. As a kid growing up, and think about different places where you could have been, like at church, think of your mom's stare. Now, when your mom stared at you, there were darts, there were messages depending on the look on her face, and think no words were needed. She didn't have to tell me to quit punching my sister in church. She just had to stare at me. And I knew she was saying that in addition to, you're in trouble, and all these other things that are going to happen. So think about that, and that's what we see. So 55% of it is body language of our nonverbal, but you know what else? 38% of it is the tone of voice. And I am guilty of having a bad tone of voice sometimes. And I know I have a loud voice. I can't help that. But the tone of voice speaks volumes to people. When you think about all of these nonverbal things, like your facial expression, your posture, your gestures, all of those things, even your appearance, when you become aware of what those that nonverbal communication is saying. If it is not saying what you want it to say, change it. So think about, I have to do this all the time. Think about how I'm sitting and how I'm standing. Are my arms crossed? And it can be so uncomfortable to have to open your arms and stand in an open posture. But you know what? At the beginning of your board meeting, when people are walking into the room, into your public meeting, don't stand there with your arms crossed. Don't avoid eye contact. Go up, have an open posture, greet them. Hi, how are you doing? So glad you're here. Would you like to fill out a comment card? We're looking forward to hearing what you have to say in our meeting. Open and all of that. So important for that. And then again, be intentional about your nonverbal. Be aware of the message it's sending and change that. And when you see always feel free to be a copycat. And when you see someone doing well, pick up on those things. Also, we have to notice how our emotions make us feel, because if you're mad, you're going to have that furrowed brow. If you're stressed, you're going to have muscles sticking out. Be aware that can affect how you look physically. Now let's go to visual aids. So visual aids are, you have to use these, just be aware of the good use of these and the not good use. So it can be an image like a picture. It can be an infographic, which is a chart that tells a story, or a graph. Also video and visual presentation. All of that are visual aids, things that we see. We do have visual learners who learn better when they see it graphically. So it should definitely add value and enhance. Sometimes it can't always replace words or numbers, but it can help a visual learner truly understand and take the message home. So use them if they add value. If they don't add value, not good. And they really do need to be clear and easy to understand for your audience. And then finally, the fourth way we communicate is in writing. And this is, many ways in writing. This is the written word. What you want to do is strive for simplicity and maybe being concise. We're going to talk about that. Do I need to be concise or lengthy, or find that in between? You definitely want to use proper spelling, grammar, and punctuation. Without that, sometimes you're failing to communicate. It can be noise. When you use especially acronyms and they're not getting through, people may not understand the acronyms. That's noise between the message and the receiver, and your communication isn't happening. And then definitely you run a review and before you click submit. And the thing about writing is that you can't rely on tone. There's no humor in writing. And so you're going to have some other way to indicate or leave the humor out. I will tell you this. Best advice I got: write your emails, every last one of your emails. Write them as if they're going to be forwarded. Just think about that. Be professional in your emails, but just assume they're going to be forwarded. Don't put anything in your email that you wouldn't want forwarded. So things to think about. As you now know these, like 4 communication methods. Which ones are you good at? Which ones do you need to work on? Think about your board members, because you're trying to communicate this information to your board. Which ones do they respond to the most? Do their faces light up? Are they puzzled when they're looking at something? And I'll tell you what, the answer to this is different for different board members. And that's the whole point of this, is I want you to be aware of that. Because you're going to have to use different communication methods with different board members to get the point across. And then which ones should you be using when you're presenting financial information? That's a different kind of communication than saying, hey mom, I just got my letter and I got accepted to the university that was my first choice. That's a different kind of communication. So of these methods, which ones are you going to use when you're presenting to your board? So now we're going to go into a little bit about communication styles. We know our method, and there are basically 4 kinds of communication styles, and we're going to go over each one of these. And I'll just be honest with you, the short thing at the end of this is that each one has its place. So let's talk about a passive communicator. These are just kind of the quiet people. They stay in the back. They avoid the confrontation. They go with the flow. You ask for their opinion. They may or may not express it. They're yielding to others. Okay. But when is this a good communication style? And I had to think about this, and I will tell you that to me, it's when I'm being chewed out. When I'm being chewed out, like, Diane, you said that wrong. You didn't, you whatever mistake I made, whatever I'm being, I say chewed out, harder word, whatever I'm being talked about in my behavior that needs to change, then this is a good thing. Just listen for it and be passive, because what I learned as a kid, if y'all were kids like me, is that if you just sit there and not say anything, don't talk back to your mom when she's telling you how bad you were, it will end. It will end, and your pain it'll be gone soon. Another good way, maybe when you're in a large group setting, and maybe when there are people in the room that, let's just call it, that are more important than you. So it's not your opinion they're seeking. It might be your governing body's opinion. So that's a time for you to be passive and let your governing body, let your mayor, let those be the ones who want to answer that question instead of you. And when you need to preserve harmony. So an aggressive communicator, this one looks mean and nasty, speaking a demanding voice, intense, dominates or controls, commanding. And I thought, there is no room for this. This would really make me mad. But you know what I thought about this when I want this person? In a crisis. Okay, there is a fire in the hallway. I need this person to say, get out of the room and go down that hallway and get out of the building. Okay, so when there's a crisis, this is what has to happen. When there's a whole lot of discussion going on, people have been talking about the issue for an hour and a half, and a decision needs to be made. So when a decision needs to be made, then the decision maker needs to say, okay, this is what we're going to do, and make that decision. So this is a communication style that works for there. And you know what I thought about of all kind of people? I thought about coaches. We generally think that coaches nudge us along and encourage us, but sometimes that coach absolutely has to have this style. Why? Run this play. No discussion, no debate, run this play. They're a leader. They have to lead. So there are times when this is called for, when we talk about maybe when our board meetings get unruly. And it's time for somebody to step in and say, okay, bring order and decorum back to this board meeting. So there is a place for that. And then there's what we call the passive aggressive communicator. These folks are kind of dangerous, okay? So this is again where their actions and their words and their feelings are not in sync. There's that it's just not happening. And sometimes you can tell it and sometimes you can't. And when I look at this, I thought of myself as a teenager, especially when I got in trouble for something that I did wrong. And I remember that I felt just like this. And my mom would say, you go in your room and you stay in your room until you change your attitude. And can I tell you something? When I went in my room, I muttered to myself, and I had facial expressions that were like, I don't like this. And I silent treatment. Oh yeah, you're not going to bother me. I'm going to bother you. So I had this kind of behavior as a teenager, and I thought about that. And I thought about, when is this style appropriate? Because to me, this is like the worst of them, right? And maybe like when you think about a time, a brief period of time, and not too intense, when agreement was made, So there was a vote and the board voted one way, and or your committee if you're in a committee room or whatever, and it didn't go your way. But you know what? You have to be united. So you need to work out your feelings somewhere where people can't see that, and these are the kinds of feelings you have. But as soon as you leave that room, leave that office, leave that meeting, you have to go out there and you have to say, we agreed this was the best decision. And you have to act that way. So, that could be a time when you need this. But let's move on. And this is really the worst communication style, but I have a feeling a lot of us have kind of done this. So the best communication style that we want to be is assertive, different from aggressive. Let's look at some of these nuances. They're not overbearing. You openly communicate. You have the courage to speak your mind, but you're not overbearing. You don't need to put someone down for you to communicate your idea. So you consider the needs of others. You aim for both sides to win. You may try to find that common ground. We disagree on these 5 things as we're talking about a budget, but these 10 things we do agree on. So let's focus on those things. And you own your feelings without blaming somebody else. I feel this way. You did not cause me to feel this way. I chose to feel this way. That's an assertive communicator. This person shows respect for people. They're emotionally intelligent. They know that you may be coming from a place where you're really passionate about and your emotions are getting the better of you, and they can see that in you and handle that well. They're firm, they're confident, so this is the most effective communication style. Think about this. You know your message. You have that confidence and that knowledge to go through. How will they receive it? You're prepared for that. So this is the kind, for the most part, where we want to be. And when we're presenting financial statements, we have to think about, sometimes we're delivering good news, sometimes not so good. So what are some points to ponder as we now know these 4 communication styles? You have to think about and adapt your style to both the situation and the information. And you may get in there and your initial style, you go in. I may be aggressive, but if I just stop and think, this is not a situation that calls for aggressive. It may call for me to be passive and sit back and let the discussion take place, So think about that. And what is the information? I don't need to pound down that our revenues exceeded our budgets this month. So think of the information in the style that we knew and become aware of how you're communicating. And it's like, whoa, do I need to take a step back and change in this particular situation? I think about things like, does a mayor need to become assertive, aggressive when he's presenting his budget, and say, thou shalt to his council, like, you need to adopt this? No, not really. You may be able to be more collaborative and say, these are the things I'm sure of that we have in the budget. These are other things. Do we have to, what style should we use when we're, having to show that there's a deficit? We had an unexpected deficit. Is that a time to be passive? I think not. I think that's a time to be assertive because we need to say those things and we need to learn how to say it hard. So let's talk about, we talked about a lot of things with communication, a couple more things to go. So let's talk about barriers. So these are things that could cause that noise between the sender and the message and the receiver. And these take a lot of different forms to these. So a physical barrier that we have all encountered, sometimes numerous times in a day, can be a technical glitch. I wrote that email. It is so well written. I reviewed it like Diane said. I cleaned up my grammar, my punctuation. It has the right tone I need it to say, even though I'm not delivering it in person. I didn't hit send. Or if you're like me, you hit send because it's the last thing you wanted to do today, and you log out, and you logged out too fast and the message sat there. So physical barriers can be things like that. Emotional barriers, you know what? to try to break those down, give them a reason to care. Jennifer talked a lot about that, and Mike Battle in our ones yesterday on governance and the passion and the energy that we bring and this higher purpose in serving the public. That right there is big enough. Language barriers can come in many shapes and sizes. It's not only because I'm speaking English and somebody else wants me to speak Chinese. That's not it. It can also be the words I use. The words are way too technical. So when you think about presenting financial statements to the governing body, the best way to think about them and how you want to present those is to say, let me think about a high school level. Because I'm not only presenting them to my governing body, I'm presenting them to my public as well. And if I really want them to understand, I don't need to talk to them like they have a PhD, because I don't have a PhD. I need to the point is to communicate, not to impress with and wow with words and things like that. A lack of focus and eye contact, what does that mean? I'm not really interested in this. I'm not really engaged. My mind is elsewhere right now, kind of thing. Don't let a fear of mistakes stop you from communicating. Don't be afraid to make a mistake. Here's the thing, own it. Understand how it was made. And own it, and do whatever you have to do to correct it when you make that. But don't let a fear of mistakes to stop you from communicating. Also, perceptions. What I learned from working with a ton of marketing people is that perception is reality. Okay, so if there's a perception out there that our town is not well run and well financially managed, that is reality. So how am I going to change their reality? How am I going to tell them reality when it really is? I have to change that perception. How am I going to change that perception? You guessed it. Strong communication with my governing body, making things available to the public, building trust, right? Being transparent, all of those things, being accountable, owning our mistakes, things like that. So know what these barriers are and work to reduce those as you're communicating. And then finally, think about the types of business messages. So we've talked about a lot of kind of things. These are basically the business messages that we're communicating to our board. There's a good news. Oh, they're going to love hearing this. Our revenues way exceeded our expenditures. We have extra money. We can work on projects that we didn't know we had money to spend. Bad news, not so good. Transmittal is just, here you go. We think of the transmittal letter in our annual comprehensive financial report. Informative, here's what it says. Instructional is just doing command. Fill out this form, do this, sign on the dotted line, inquiry and complaint. And, of all of these types of messages that we're communicating, which ones should our financial statements be? Which one are they? I would love to do number one every single month, but you know what? I can't, because it's not all like that. But the point is, for our governing body, is to inform. Here's what it says. Here are the facts. Here's the interpretation. Why? Because your governing body can take that and make decisions. They need facts to make decisions, and they need to understand what's going on. So that's the best thing, the best way and to think of your financial statements. So let's talk about our communication skills that we should develop. And we can all think of people who do these things much better than we do. But what I want you to know, what I want you to think about is, think about people who do these well and then go mimic them. But all of these things, this is not like something you're born with that you have no control over. You have full control over this. So develop these skills. And work hard to develop these skills with people, and think about a lot of things. Think about your posture and your nonverbal communication. But the other thing is, when I made this list, what in heaven's name does thinking have to do with communicating? I think of thinking as what's going on in my little Diane head and not what I'm communicating to somebody else. So how is this a communication skill? And when you think about it, now that you know all these things, you're going to ruminate through them, but being aware. I want you to now be aware of how others may perceive you and adjust accordingly. Reflect on the feedback that you've received. If somebody, I get told a lot, Diane, your voice is so loud, lower your voice, lower your voice. And I try to think about that a lot, and keep getting that feedback and keep doing that. And sometimes I just am in the moment and I'm talking real loud. Has a lot to do with passion, planning the words you're going to say, planning for your tone, and then thinking about how you're going to deliver a message when it's not going to be well received. So yes, thinking is a big part of communicating. So let's talk briefly about the characteristics of a professional, because when you're presenting financial statements to the board needs to view, they're not only looking at the message that you're giving them, they're looking at the messenger. And the messenger is equally as important. And I will tell you, I am a mom of 2 boys. And when my 2 little boys were jumping on their beds, as they always did because they had bunk beds and they loved to jump on the top one and jump off, and mama would go in there and say, stop jumping on your bed. They said, okay. I went down the hall and they kept jumping on the bed. So, but the best messenger was the daddy, because the daddy has the booming voice. And the daddy had the presence to go in and say, stop jumping on your bed. And all of that big presence, testosterone and all that. And those 2 little boys responded. Same message, different messenger, and they responded. So now think of yourself as the messenger and look at these things, characteristics of a professional. So what is somebody who is dependable? That first point has been on my refrigerator since my boys were teenagers. I look at it every morning when I eat my breakfast, and I think about myself and these. Dependable. You do what you say you're going to do. If I promised Lizzie that I was going to send her that information before today is out, I do it. I'm dependable. She can count on me to do that. Responsible is what you need to do, not what you want to do. So I may want to take a nice long lunch break. It's a pretty day. Go walk around the lake. But I need to get that information to Lizzie that I promised I would send her. So if I'm a responsible person, I'm going to do what I need to do before what I want to do. And what is an accountable person? Basically, you take ownership. You take ownership. Yes, I did send that email. Yes, I did have the wrong attachment. I'm sorry about that. Let me get you the right attachment to that email. Just being accountable, taking ownership. And when you think about weighing it on a scale and how you define trust, and are you trustworthy? These 3 characteristics really make up what someone is trustworthy. And a professional wants to be trusted. And that governing body needs to trust their messenger and what they're saying. They cannot ever think that that person is deceiving them. Believe passionately in what you do. These are what professionals do. They believe passionately. It is a passionate thing to work in government and serve the public. And it's tremendous. You make differences in people's lives in what you do. Be passionate about that. Own that. Be proud of that. Pursuing happiness and not just contentment, there's a nuance there. And I would tell you this, happiness is a choice. And whatever happens to you today, you get up and it's cold and it's raining, don't make that ruin your day and say it's going to be dreary all day today. No. You're going to be happy about today. You've got great things to look forward to today, a lot of things going on. You're excited. Committed to a path of true excellence and strict adherence to highest values. Always, always, always. This is the tone you set. This is the way you live every day. Always be consistent with this. Can I tell you? Do the right thing all the time. Even when it takes more time, costs more money, do the right thing all the time. And look at that last one. You're allowed to fail, but you're not allowed to not try. You have to try. When you're accountable, you say, I tried this and it didn't work, But I didn't know that it wouldn't work until I tried it. So you are allowed to fail, but you have to try. You have to try. Other characteristics of a professional, they agree to be coached and get that feedback. Look at number 6, look at 8, continually invest, and look at 10. Personal professional growth is non-negotiable. Those are all saying the same things. And what are they saying? I've got to get better. I may be good at some things, but I've got to get better. There's more I can learn. There's more I can do. I could have handled that situation differently. I didn't notice that the emotional state of that person when I said those things. Think about that. Always striving to get better. Teamwork, not optional. Not optional. It's mandatory. Bring in a team. We all know today diversity is so terrific in our organizations. I saw a saying that said, if we're all thinking the same, somebody's not thinking. And it's true. When you form a committee to work on a project, don't bring in people who think the same as you. Bring in people with diverse ideas, backgrounds, knowledge, and it will be much, much better, and you'll have a much better product for that. Relationship building. This is what professionals do. They build relationships. So when you think about that, when you're the one standing up there giving that message to your governing body, okay, you want to be perceived as professional. All right, now to the second part, which is financial information to the board. So this is, I'm going to ask you, like, do you know what this is? Do you even know what language this is? And I'm going to tell you many of us are familiar with this. This is 1 Corinthians 13, which is the love chapter, that starts off by saying, if I speak with tongues of men and of angels, but do not have love, I have become a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And in this part, what we have on the page is, it ends with, love is patient, love is kind, and is not jealous. Love does not brag and is not arrogant. And why do I say that? We know those words. Some of us try to live those words. I have those words on plaques in my house so I can remember to always be loving. I'm familiar with the words. I know it. But you know what? What do people see when they see this? They're like, Diane, I don't even know what that's saying. I have no clue. And what I want you to think about, because this is a visual, is this what your governing body is seeing when you put your beautiful, hard worked on financial statements in front of them? Is this what they're seeing? And the reason I said this is because a pastor told me we had talked about, I was treasurer of a church, we had talked about the financial statements of the church, and I went back to his office, and he happened to have his Greek New Testament open, and he showed me something like this, and he said, do you know what this is? And I'm like, oh, I have no clue. And he said, he told me what it was and the chapter, and I was very familiar with it, and he said, that's what your financial statements are like to me. And boy, did that hit home, right? I need to change. I need to adapt a lot of those things we talked about earlier. So just think about that. I also think about the Charlie Brown teacher, womp, 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 where they're saying words, but the words just aren't really getting through. So financial information to consider. Now we're going to talk about the universe, okay? So this is not a thou shalt. These are just suggestions. What kind of financial information does your board need on what kind of basis? So monthly, it's basically 5 main things. And I use the terms throughout this income statement and balance sheet as the generic terms for that shows your revenues and your expenditures. That's your income statement, and shows your assets, liabilities, and fund balance. Those are your balance sheets. So I don't want to use technical terms to alienate everyone. So basically, every month, general fund budget to actual. That would be your income statement, but they've adopted a budget. You show them the budget to actual every single month. Can I tell you, on these things, don't miss a month. Just because your board may not meet in November because it corresponds with Thanksgiving holidays, you still create it and you email it to them or mail it to them or put it in their mailbox or whatever it is you do. You still create it every single month. A projection for how the fiscal year will end. Wouldn't our governing body need to know that? We're going to talk a little bit more about that statement, but if every month, because that changes every month, and if every month they could look and see, they can see where that ship is heading, and they can change the direction of that ship sooner rather than later if they know how this is going to affect their fiscal year. And then the general fund balance sheet, we all know, well, a lot of us learned in school, there are actually 3 financial statements: income statement, balance sheet, and cash flows. One by itself is not enough, and we learned that 2 by themselves are not enough also. But for our purposes in government, we don't do cash flows, so the general fund balance sheet needs to be there. The income statement is not enough. They need to know your receivables, your payables, your cash balances, and things like that. And the other thing is a narrative explanation of your major variances. Why? Because the Local Government Budget Act tells us we have to tell our board in writing when we have negative variances on revenues or expenditures of 5% or more. So explain the major variances. And then the 5th thing could be something that is an economic indicator. So this may be where those visuals come in on your most volatile revenue thing, but an economic indicator. Often it's sales tax, but it could be something else. Okay, quarterly, what kinds of things? Income statement and balance sheet for our 2 proprietary funds. Why? Because these proprietary funds have a purpose, and the purpose on my internal service fund is to cover my costs, and the purpose on my enterprise funds, like internal service funds, are often things, I'm using technical jargon, so I just caught that. Those are where we often put our self-insured funds. Enterprise funds are our funds like our utility funds that we have. They have a profit motive. How does the board know if they're charging the right rates in these funds unless they get information? So we need to give that. If you have investments, give them that. What other information in your unique situation in your government could be on a quarterly basis? Board needs to monitor, but not near as often as monthly. Okay, how about things like twice a year? So here we go with our other fund types. And when you look at these, why? Special revenue funds, why? Because the board adopted a budget. They're responsible for knowing how it's performing, how actual is performing. They're responsible for that in compared to the budget that they adopted. Debt service funds, why? Because they want to know that you're making your principal and your interest payments on time, because they're the ones who approve the borrowing. They sign those debt covenant agreements. They pass motions and resolutions and ordinances to do that. They have a right to know, are you making those payments on time? Capital projects, same thing. They're approving your budgets. They're approving your bid awards. They need to know how those things are working. Fiduciary funds, in light of GASB 84, that's up to you if you think that's important. Generally, not a whole lot. And it may be even annually. And what else can you do? And then things annually for your board. So governing bodies, here's what you do. You have a budget. You need to adopt that annually. You know what else you have to do? For those of you who have millage rates, every year you have to adopt millage rates. That's an annual thing. You know what else you have to do every year is your audit. Whether it's a review, a test, compilation, or audit, the presentation of that report. Those are some things every year. In addition to that, I used to like to give my board a schedule of the debt principal and interest payments, because it was always a happy day when we closed on a bond and we got $40 million deposited. But can I tell you, I had to remind them, dude, we have to pay that back. And here's how we're going to pay it back. And here's the payments we have to make this year. And also a list of bank accounts. Don't put the account number down, but you may have the name of that account and the purpose and the signers, especially if you have a policy that your board adopted that said anything to the effect of your bank accounts, like have as few as possible, authorized signers, things like that. So what does that prove? You are showing your board that you're complying with their policies. So that's the kind of information to think about. And the other thing to think about as you're thinking about financial information is this. What's the purpose? What's the purpose? Why would I give them a list of investments, Diane, on a quarterly basis? Well, that could be the 3rd bullet point, to improve compliance with their policy, because they adopted that policy and they want to know. So if you think about these 3 main things, the primary one is you've got to give them information so they can make informed decisions. They can't make informed decisions without the information. That's why it's not an option to not give them financial information monthly. Just not an option. I would not want to approve something in my personal life if I didn't know what my bank balance was, what my upcoming expenses were, if I had enough money in there. Do we have to do this now or not? You just need that. And also, another purpose is to be transparent and accountable to the public for what you're doing. So think about this when you think about the purpose. What is the purpose of this information? Because it may stop you from giving it to them. It may not have a really good purpose. So you could say, if y'all wanted to know more, because I had great financial information, I've got it. I've got spreadsheets, 9 ways to Sunday and all that stuff, but it has to serve a purpose. So key financial information, that's what we talk about. We've got a universe. And let's talk about the 3 to 5 numbers that a board member should focus on. That question from a new board member. Can I tell you? I'm not going to tell you what they are. Here are some big key numbers, and you all recognize these things. But the real true answer is what's going on. What's going on at this time in this month? And that's what you have to think about every single month when you're presenting financial statements to the board. If you have a problem with something, that's going to be key. Once the problem is solved, payables may be a problem. I may be behind in my payables for some reason. They're going to want payables reports. When I get caught up paying my bills and it's not a problem anymore, that goes off and something else can come up. So the truth is, what's going on? That's up for you to decide. When you prepare your financial information, take a step back. What's going on? And look at this and say, what's the key things they need to know this month? So here are some suggestions, and these are basically column headings for presenting a budget to actual income statement. So in this one right here, it could be a month, and you could have your actual and your budget for the month, and then the same month last year. And then here you would have same information year to date actual, year to date budget, and then year to date same period. This is kind of the most information, and that's very helpful, but sometimes it takes a lot. There's a cost benefit to providing it. And will this kind of information work? Could we just give them February actual and then our year to date actual and our year to date budget? Because that works too, and that's good information. And yep, that's really helpful too. Think about in both of these, do you want a variance? And do you want to give them a percent or an amount or both? And how are you going to denote a positive and a negative variance for that? So on your another row, these are the rows now. So that was the column headings across the top. These are the rows going down. And the key financial information, you see these highlights. That was in that list. So you might have all your list of revenues, and you have your total revenues by state and federal, and then your total revenues. But if you want your governing body to hone in, if you want to communicate, they're going to want to know these numbers every month. Whether they're key this month or not, they're going to want to know these. So when you highlight them on your report like this, guess what? They're going to know every month, I can hone in and get that information. When you're presenting your budget to actual, think about your level of detail. And I know this is really, really hard to do, okay? Because you have ones who want a whole lot and ones who don't. And the right answer is when you need 1 page, you're going to go to low level of detail. You might be looking at trends or something else. But often for boards, a medium level of detail works. And a high level of detail is way too much. You don't want to give your board a 150-page printout from your computer software of your income statement that month and expect them to digest that, because that's not going to happen. So think about what you want to communicate for that. And what I used to do is do a medium level, and then onto my next slide, presenting, or one of the future slides, I would present that major variance discussion that would get them into the level of detail to explain the major variances from the budget. Okay, balance sheet. So here's the thing. If you use the same level of detail as the audit report, often doesn't need to go less than that. for that, because this is more at a high level. And instead of throwing a number out there like cash balance at the end of February was 32 million, it helps for your board to know what was it in relation to what. Show your cash balance for last February. Did it go up or down, kind of thing. And so this is how you would present your financial information, just so that they can kind of know. This is just a little excerpt. High level, 2 years, and then your major variances would be what happened in the ensuing 12 months to make it go down, and you would be able to answer those questions. So presenting your fiscal your projection for the year, this is the easy way that you do this. You allocate your annual budget. You take your budget. This is what we're going to spend total. You allocate it, try to spread it out over those 12 months, which would give you 14 columns, because you'd have a total and then you'd have your budget. As each month closes, replace that budgeted number with the actual number. And now when you go look at that excess or deficit at the bottom of the year, it's going to change every month, and this is going to show them that information. So here's kind of what it looks like. Here's your rows going across with your annual budget. And so these 3 months closed, and then these were the end. And so these are all actual, and then these are all budget. And I have my total. And then I go down. This is a high level, a low level of detail, because you want this on one page, and it's every month side by side, so you can start seeing your trends and sales tax and everything. And this number right here, year-to-date excess in your total column, this is the number that changes every month. Highlight that number. Your board will often, I had a board member who looked, this was the one financial statement they paid attention to the most. And this will give them guidance and help them to make decisions. Major explanations, narrative explanations of major variances. This form, this kind of report, first, an executive summary. These are 3 sentences that basically say what happened this month. How did your actual revenues perform? Dollar and percent to what you were thinking. Same for your expenditures, and that difference will explain your actual, and just list primarily. Primarily in here, my actual revenues exceeded my budget. It was primarily ad valorem taxes. This month, my expenditures were over budget. Primarily, list 1 or 2 or 3 things. That way they know at a very high level what happened this month. Also, consider providing key financial indicators. You can provide these for the year, and then you can go look at your month, and basically your excess, your revenues, and your expenditures, and how they compared with your budget every month. At a glance, they can see this, and then provide an explanation of the major variances. So a brief comment, but here's the thing. Describe the reason for the variance. And you know what? Explain the timing. And if you often have to say, on my copy machines, it has 2 months this month, so next month it won't have any. What you want to do, if you're doing that too often, you need to tighten up your internal controls on your reporting end and either accrue or get those things recorded right. And you know what? When you're over budget in a month, a lot of times the timing is you budgeted for that, but you budgeted it in a different month. So it's not going to blow you for the year. It just blows you for that 1 month. And then brief comments on your balance sheet, same kind of thing. You know, what's going over. Offer, and I would tell you, and just the reason for what's going on. But consider offering an interpretation, and do this lightly. You know, because my board wanted an interpretation of Diane, how do you feel about what our fund balance is doing? They looked for that. They wanted that. So I offered that. If yours wants to offer that, give them that kind of interpretation, because you're the financial expert. And whatever kind of other information. John had a great presentation yesterday about FEMA. And if FEMA's in your life, it's tens of millions of dollars. And this is some key information. So when you're getting questions, then think about creating a report to provide to your board and how often you need to create it. And that's a good one. So information visually, you know, make your title of your chart say, so don't title it, you know, sales tax revenues over the last 3 months. Tell them what the chart is saying and interpret it for them. And make sure that you label and your scale doesn't distort. So a line chart, use the right kind of chart. This one shows trends over time. So I've got 4 years here, and I've got 12 months for 4 years. A lot of information packed into here. And then bar charts, they compare values. So I've got different values. I have different time periods here. I've got different values and my dollar amounts. This chart is packed full of information. Look at the colors and how they stand out. This little guy here is standing out like a sore thumb, right? That color is speaking to me. Have that chart be valuable. Quarterly information, you may want to break it down by quarter like this for your enterprise fund and just fill in the blanks. Or you may want to do, if that's too difficult, you may just want to go your 1 quarter and then your year to date. Either one works. Tips to keeping everyone on track, make a calendar of those major events and provide it to your governing body so that they will know. And you know what else? This helps when you're working on the agenda. When you're working on your May agenda, you better put something in there to adopt those millage rates, because what you know is they're due in June. You know that you have to approve salaries before you have to do a budget, so when is that going to happen? This is kind of set up for a calendar fiscal year. You have to present the budget before you adopt the budget, and then you're going to talk about those audit results. So that helps and to get those things on your agendas way early. When you get a question, consider incorporating it. Create a schedule of which extra reports to come. We talked about a bunch of reports, and especially those quarterly ones. You don't have to do all quarterly ones in the same months. You can spread it out and spread your work out and make it doable for them so that you can really do this in light of everything else that you have going on. And then, so let's think about this. How will I not just communicate, but effectively communicate? And what specific financial information to my governing body? And why? What's the purpose? So they can make prudent and informed financial decisions. For them to make prudent and informed financial decisions this month, what are the things, the 3 to 5 key things that they need to know? I can give them more that they can read at their leisure, like that explanation of major variances from my budget. But what do they need to know this month? It's going to be different next month. And you know what? If I think about all of those things and really plan, guess what? I can say everything I need to say in maybe 5 to 10 minutes. And now you really, really have communicated with your board. And with that, I want to thank you so very much for your attention. But the biggest thing I really want to thank you for is the work that you do every day to serve our people of Louisiana. They put their trust in you when they elected you. They're counting on you to do things for them. The decisions that you make affect their everyday lives. It's a big burden to carry, but you know what? Carry it joyfully and fill it out and do it to the best of your abilities. And you attending this session says, I want to learn more. I want to be better at my work. And so I really, really thank you for that and all that you do. I thank you for the sacrifices that you make for them. I know you work late hours. When we're in legislative session and our team that does fiscal notes, there's no such thing as a weekend. There's no such thing as a time off. You may be working at 10 at night because that committee is going to discuss that fiscal note at 8 in the morning. And you may not get very much sleep, but they do that. And why? Because the process is so very good and makes for good laws. And so sometimes you have to make those sacrifices and you have to work late. I want you to know we appreciate it so much. We also want you to know so much that the legislative auditor is here. We want to be, as Mike Wagasback will always say, we want to be your trusted advisor. We want you to reach out to us and say, I have a question, Diane, or I have to admit something. Can you help me work through this situation? Call us. Call us all the time because we really, really want to help you. And we all have the same goal, right? Which is improve local government audit quality and audit results and everything else. So thanks so much for what you do for us. And we're going to take a moment or two to switch over, and you get a wonderful Lanyap session, which I hope you'll really enjoy. Angela's going to come and talk to us about the final rule on the American Rescue Plan Act. So what some of you don't know is that when we were kind of sluggishly coming back from Christmas holidays and in early January, the Treasury, U.S. Department of Treasury, issued a final rule, and there are some major changes from that interim final rule. And it's just, Angela says, Diane, we've got to get this communicated to them because they need to know. And it's a lot of good news that you're going to like to hear. So give us a moment or two to switch speakers, and I'll be back with you to close out our CLGE. Thank you so much for all of your attention and for what you do.